So I think I'm on. Yes, I can hear me. Good morning. My name is Sal D'Agostino. I'm the president of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. And yeah, as Mike said, government is handing this over to the private sector. And he's absolutely right in terms of, how many people here have actually tried to do a startup at one point or another time in their lives, right? Doing a startup when you've got the government as a partner, as Mike pointed out, can be a challenge, right? Because you've got all this inertia and gravitas of the government and its message, and then you've got the need for an organization to evolve quickly. So relatively speaking, we did that over the last 3 years of evolving from a strategy to putting in place an organization with a structure which is one that actually allows input from a very broad category of stakeholders and has resulted really in the last year of us moving from an idea to an organization with something and then to being operational and effective and making a difference to everybody else in this room on an ongoing basis. And Mike's right. You know, we are going to be a permanent fixture, and a lot of what the IDESG is about this year is beginning to turn on the lights from that permanent fixture that we've put in place. So I'm just going to give you some background today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the organization. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the framework. And I'll stay away from the registry because a number of folks are going to go into quite a bit of detail on that as we proceed. So is this just a button? Yeah. Green button. There we go. So that was Mark Anthony. That was Mike. And this is me. So this all started in 2011. I don't know if we've got the whole background here, but the national strategy in April was put out there. And one of the things that it did, it charted new space in the way that identity is done online. I mean, everybody knows here that it's a challenge. You read about it every day in the newspaper. It's easy to enumerate the challenges. What's difficult is to set a vision or a goal. And if you look at what's in the national strategy, it really is kind of a higher bar for identity. It's trying to do it a little bit better than what's out there. And taking that step forward is not the easiest thing in the world, because a lot of the pressures that are out there in the marketplace are sometimes contrary to those that are to the benefit of individuals. So this put in place the idea that there would be a public-private partnership. There's a lot of obvious reasons why a national ID in the United States is a difficult thing and probably a non-starter, and that and NIST and President Obama made a wise and probably politically correct choice in going down this route. And so that's how the IDESG came into space. So everybody's got their identity numbers, right, which are mostly either a horror story or the huge opportunity. So we've got ours. I'm just wondering if anybody's got any numbers around identity that you use to express why you're in this business or why there's a challenge out there. I don't know, as an example, what's the third largest cause of death in the United States? Mistaken identity in the hospital, right? So if you go down, heart attack, cancer, identity, right? So so anywhere you look, you can go find numbers, you can go find statistics, you can find very real reasons why this needs to be done properly. I don't think everybody here would be so dramatic as to say this is a matter of life and death, but it actually is in some circumstances. It's certainly a matter of, from an economic perspective, the net gain for an economy that does identity well is probably 4 orders of magnitude, Mike, of your investment in the IDESG. So, I mean, not only is smart money going long on the IDESG, but they're also looking smart money for what the return on this can be for anybody that's investing in doing identity properly. And all that we're trying to do is to help you do that. These are some statistics as to why. Those numbers are going up, right? You take 2014 numbers, double or triple them in terms of what's going on in 15. And unfortunately, the trend is still in the bad guys' direction. Identity theft, who's been experienced it? My wife got the OPM hack because she's on a FAQ for Commerce and Interior, right? So I didn't have to be infected. I could get my personal information through my wife's relationship with the government release. try to, hopefully everybody's trying to do something. I mean, this is an interesting one though, right? It's like 62% of people didn't use mobile banking apps because they were afraid of doing online identity. Matter of fact, some people who signed up for this workshop refused to attend because when you use the Cloud Identity Summit app, its privacy statement says they were going to share your information. So, so the actual user experience sometimes when you try to do this stuff for real is not one that induces you to engage. And a lot of what the IDESG is trying to do is to change that, right? To try to create an environment where you have an incentive from a life, from a wealth, from an ease of use, and from a trust perspective in doing identity online. So, that's what we're about. We're trying to create trust in a place where there, unfortunately, is very little for the most part at own time, or trust in Benjamin Franklin and the $100 bills. So I'm going to get into the IDEF. Does anybody know what the IDEF is? Who's in the room? Notwithstanding. Great. So for those of us that do, let me know how I do it as part of the presentation. Right, so it's a framework. So it's a set of rules of the road. I mean, a lot of times the word framework brings a lot of technical things to mind. So as an example, you could go across the hall and find a technical framework for identity management with SCIM. Or you can go find a technical specification with FIDO around how to do authentication. But, and those are good things, right? Interoperability matters, security matters. But at the end of the day, in order to try to do identity properly, this group is of the opinion that it needs to be a little bit broader. It needs to take individuals into account, and it also needs to address privacy and usability. For those of us that are security professionals, 30-digit passwords, that just doesn't cut it, right? Good security, bad usability. So if you look at the little back of the cards that everybody's handed out, there's a whole list of things, and you can see that we've got these 4 different categories that the framework is based on, right? So given that framework that we put together, which results from the committees of the IDESG, which Jen Barron's here, who's our plenary chair, oversees our committee work. We really have a cadre of probably, 100 experts who have been working on this over time. It's a real number. I mean, 100 of the leading identity experts in the United States and around the world have contributed to putting together this set of baseline requirements. And so you have the baseline requirement, which is a very high-level statement, and then below that you have a number of best practices and supporting materials if you want to get into it in depth. And so those combination of interoperability, privacy, and security puts together a set of characteristics, capabilities, things that you can measure yourself against. And one of the things that's also different about the framework is the fact that I don't know, anybody here tried to go and get FIPS 140 approval? I'm not, no particular NIST bashing, by the way. Or have ever gone through common criteria or an ISO, I can bash ISO too, right? So ISO 27000 kinds of assurance frameworks, right? Not cheap, a lot of time, technically narrow, very security conscious kinds of things. Not useful things in the world, everybody does them, but not something that you're always going to run around and say, hey, can I go do this again and again and again? We've tried to make this framework a little easier to do. Mary's going to get in a lot of details around Mary Hodder, who's our vice president of the IDESG and also chairs our usability, our user experience committee. He has been basically headed and chaired the effort around the launch. Brings that kind of perspective where it should be usable. It's also free for the first year, and the way that we put it together, Mary, how long is it taking people roughly? Just curious.
So I think that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 hours to fill out the form. I filled out the form for us, for IDESG.org and for IDEFregistry.org, and it took me 2 hours.
Right. So relative, maybe Mary's extremely familiar with the document, so let's raise it by a log. So maybe 2 to 3 days, perhaps. 2 to 3 days, no cost, and suddenly now you've done an assessment. probably the easiest identity assessment and maybe the most useful identity assessment, in my opinion, you'll ever do, certainly in terms of value for money and effort. And why it's necessary, hopefully I've already made that argument. The scoping statement that we put together basically said what we were going to go do. I don't need to spend a lot of time because we're going to show you what we did. The baseline is the thing that you measure against. It's the categories that are on the back of that flyer. 7 interoperability, 15 privacy, 15 security, and 7 usability guidelines. Mike's right. It's unique. There's no other place that you can go out and have a framework which is this wide-reaching. You know, and again, some people, when they look at this and say, wait a minute, it's not a framework. It doesn't tell me, you know, which cipher suite I need to use in order to be able to do TLS correctly. Well, it's not that kind of technical framework, right? I mean, it's a framework that looks at what good online identity characterizes. And you know, in terms of how the IDEF guidelines apply to stakeholders, I mean, we're in the process of learning that. I mean, a lot of us are. We think it basically gives us a way of showing that we do a good job at things. We think it's a way to message to customers and to our competitors that we're on top of our identity game. And you know, I mean, and we will see from there. But given the well-rounded nature of this, I think it applies in a lot of very important ways. Right, the listing service is now called the registry. We're going to talk a lot about that going forward. I don't think I need to spend too much time. It has debuted. Our message is right, so empowering people to be able to do this themselves, managing what a real risk is out there, doing it in such a way that you know, you're secure in the safety sense, right? So you don't have, you know, it would be nice if you didn't need to keep your guard up all the time, you know, to channel Muhammad Ali, right? And you don't want to have to feel like you've got to, the second you go online, you got to start with a rope-a-dope. You know, it would be nice if you could actually feel like the environment that you're getting into is one you can start looking at the benefits instead of looking over your shoulders. And the other thing is to encourage people to join in this organization. You know, there are a lot of very, very smart people working across the identity space on topics that are of interest. I mean, I think anybody that engages actually can raise their game as a result of the interaction. Right. Again, the scoping statement, I'm not going to spend too much time on. The baseline requirements, I'd like to just sort of stop there and have people take a look at what's on the back of that card, and you know, at this point, begin to think: is that seem like a usable level? I mean, in terms of where we got into this, are these the kind of things that, I mean, if you're a security professional, are we covering the stuff that's there? I mean, we spent a lot of time to do this, but now, you know, the whole idea of this launch is to engage a wider, you know, population. I mean, the fact that we've got a room full of people, most of whom never heard of us before, I think is great, because that's what we're trying to accomplish. It's not great that we haven't heard about us necessarily, but you have now. So that's you know, so those are out there. You know, is there value in a framework like this? Just curious. Yes, no? How many think there's value to be determined? Anybody question why we're doing this? No? It's okay. We like questions. Mike and I both love controversy, by the way. You know, we're happy to take on anybody who wants to push us on what we're doing. Well, that's great. Yeah, and basically, you know, those requirements serve as the guidelines, right? So you can actually go and check the back of that card off, right? I mean, to Mary's point, you know, be interested. Does anybody, when they look at that, say, what does that mean? Right? It's like, are there things on there that are not clear? Right? Or could you actually tick a box, right? Could you, because the idea here is that this is a self-assessment, right? So if there's not any, you know, if you're unable to understand what it is that we're asking you to do, then, you know, maybe we haven't hit it at the right level. So, yeah, so curious as far as that's concerned.
I have a question. How are the baseline requirements
Right. So three of the categories, usability, privacy, and security, map directly to committees inside the IDESG. So the work in those groups was to take the national strategy for trusted identities in cyberspace and its goals, right? Which are all about doing identity right online. Mike, can you help me with the goals? Right? So sustainability, easy to use, secure and resilient, and privacy enhancing, right? So, thank you. I knew we could get that. I'm completely into the usability, privacy, security, and interoperability version of this. So sometimes I walk past the original guidelines. But that was what we were chartered to do, right? So we had to come up with guidelines that represented those NSTIC goals, and these are the categories that we decided that they should be put together in. Some map directly. There's a little bit of excuse me. I apologize for that. That's someone saying, how come you don't know the 4 NSTIC principles? But that's where it all comes from, right? So it comes from the NSTIC principles and putting together a set of guidance that could be actionable for a self-assessment and further assessments of identity services, right? So what we did for these 4 categories, basically, which was to come up with these various things which are on the back of it, was to build something called a functional model, right? So in that functional model, what we talk about are governance, interoperability, these different things that occur in the process of doing identities, what activities are associated with them, and what roles. So we actually went in and tried to build a model of how identity works very specifically online. And what we came up with as part of that was a series of core operations, right? And then this is what we characterize them, right? So if you look at an identity, and again, this is going to be brought into further detail in later presentations, but that's sort of the life cycle of an identity, right? You go from registration to the issuance to authentication and authorization, and then other things that happen once you've already used your identity, right? Because it doesn't stop, right? So unfortunately, very often, your information is sitting somewhere and further steps are going to take place even after you've been granted rights to access to something, right, in the authorization step. So what we did was to put together this functional model, which could then define the services of service providers and then use those requirements to be able to develop a way of measuring how well people are doing identity online, right? So, you can be doing so what we did was then try to further break that down into sort of the things the identirati are used to talking about, right? So, attribute control, token binding, right? These are words that in the Cloud Identity Summit, everyone knows what it is. And then if we're off talking in other audiences, then we need to explain what each of these things mean. But I think in this audience, everybody's pretty familiar with the items that are on this. And again, this just sort of points out the thing that you're going to measure. So when you do attribute control, how good a job do you do in terms of usability, privacy, interoperability, security, right? Not just how good a job do you do of doing attribute control, or not just how good a job do you do of actually revoking people's credentials, but how well do you do in terms of what we effectively have created these rules of the road for it. And so then who does that apply to at the end of the day? It could apply to other trust frameworks. I mean, one of the things that we're doing is that our framework certainly doesn't stand out there alone. We're very much aware that others exist. There's an effort that's ongoing on part of the IDESG as it exists today to take other trust framework mappings, like as an example, those that the Kantara initiative would use. So Kantara mapping to the government's FICAM, 4 levels of assurance, is a way that they measure identity providers. I actually happen to be a former board member of Kantara and currently the secretary of its leadership council, and very knowledgeable about it. But the Kantara Identity Assurance Framework doesn't exactly cover all the things that you get inside the IDESG. So one of the things that we're doing now is saying, okay, if you are Kantara level 3, then what boxes does that tick on the back of that card? So the idea that this framework can act kind of as a hub for other identity frameworks that are out there as well, right? So, and that also allows people to have multiple entry points into sort of this identity ecosystem that we're trying to bring further to life in terms of doing things better. So if you're a Kantara member, you can figure out how to map the IDEF. If you've got the IDEF mapping to Kantara, that sort of sets you up for going through their identity assurance framework. The same thing would be true for others that are out there. So, I mean, at some point, we could do this to FISBA, we could do it to FICAM, and that's ongoing work on the IDSG's part. Relying parties can use this as well, right? So even though you're measuring identity service provider functionality in this, if you're a relying party, you're handling people's identities as well. And there may be a lot of value to you as a relying party to be able to represent to your customers how you're doing a good job around identity and how you're adhering to what in fact are the national principles as laid out in the identity ecosystems baseline requirements, right? So it's not, so among those in the pipeline who are early adopters and going to be involved in the registry, it's not just the Oracle or the Pings of the 100 people that do FIDO who are providing technology and services. It can also be the consumers of those services as well from a relying party perspective. And it also can be individuals at the same time, right? So while you as an individual wouldn't necessarily be listing as a service provider, we believe there is a lot of value to having the equivalent of what might be an Angie's List or a consumer reports for identity services. You as an individual can go and look at someone who's providing authentication or authorization or any of the services that are laid out in that functional model and determine whether or not they score well enough for you to feel confident about using their services, right? So if you look at someone and they score completely high on security and drop off the board on privacy, you can go, well, secure but, right? If interoperability matters to you, you can go look at how someone grades out in that scorecard and determine that as an individual user. And you could even be an individual inside an enterprise who's evaluating identity services for your relying party component as well. So there's all different ways that members of the ecosystem can leverage the registry in the transparent way that it gives a balanced view of how identity services are being provided. So, yeah, I mean, this is what we think we're doing, right? So we're actually thinking that we're moving an identity revolution forward. This is different than the way it's done before. This is not you and your identity as the product, right? Which is the case, right? I mean, this is you and your identity being treated as a customer. And hopefully, that revolution and the benefits that flow from it of life and death, of economic prosperity, and making life easier for everybody is something that this revolution can achieve. And there's going to be a lot more in this. Again, this is an overview. I'm kind of restraining myself from trying to dive into too much of the good stuff that's been going on here. But so either join the IDSG, attest, tell a friend, or the committees are open. You don't even have to be a member of the IDSG to put a toe in the water to participate. And follow up with me. We're all going to be around. Anybody who's got a green button, we'd be happy to help you out. Or you ask them why they're not wearing a green button and can't help you out. So that's it. Demonstrate excellence, express your commitment to something that matters, and differentiate your organization from those that don't. There's value to the individual, value to the company, value to the country and the world as a whole. Yeah. So at this point, I wonder if there's any questions. Mark, really good to see you. Mark DeFreya, who's the secretary of IDSG, did manage to get in on his flight for his talk, which starts in about 5 minutes. That's good to see. So yeah, so that's Mark DeFreya. I'll stop right here. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from the audience for Sal?
Our listing service of the IDSG. There's got to be someone who wants to take a step. There we go. Excellent. That was my goal, get someone to raise their hand. Thank you. I'll be following up with you shortly.